You are now tuned into the smooth sounds of TMG. I'm your host, the Marcus Garrett. Usually I pull the most controversial statement to the first 15 seconds, but then I realized it'd just be easier to ask the most controversial statement in the beginning of the episode. So this show, and I let the listeners vote on it, may be named Don't Trust, or actually it's Don't Trust 30-Year-Olds, which is something that I pulled from the book, and I'll go into more detail. But I guess the controversial subject that I want to start with is you asked a man to marry you. So to give some context, my audience is 70% women. I feel like they might be fascinated by this. So
70% women, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, can you walk us through that story? I guess let's start with how you came to that conclusion, and then we can talk about how it went.
I mean, man, it's a long wind up. It took a while for me. Marcus, I feel like we should tell a little backstory though,
Please.
because you're like, oh, Kayleen, tell me about yourself. But I have to say that I spent 2 years interviewing our host here. I asked him everything about his life, including such personal questions like this for my book that I wrote about being in your 30s and how, we're reimagining adulthood and what our milestones can be and when we achieve them. And I didn't know Marcus. I had heard his story that I'm sure you guys are familiar with about getting into debt and getting himself out of it. And I said, I'd like you to just talk to me about everything, beyond debt, romantic relationships, whether you want to have kids, are you happy in your work? And Marcus opened himself up completely. And so he's one of the 8 people in the book. And I tell my story too. And the question you asked is, part of me figuring out, like, did I want to get married? Who did I want to get married to? When was right? And so, yeah, I just decided that this was the person and this is what I wanted. And, I went for it. And I'm sure many women have had that thought, and can I do that? And I don't want to spoil the book entirely, but, I did take a flight. It was like a monkey drunk on rom-coms was in charge of my brain. I was like, what am I doing? Is this right? I was terrified. So I'm sure, I have some sense of how, men when they are proposing feel. But it was just what I wanted and what I was ready for. So I decided to do it. And I did do it.
Yeah, if I may sprinkle a little bit of additional, like I said, without giving too much away from the book. And then I'm going to go into the book and do the traditional spill here. This is the foreshadowing to get the people in. Hopefully they're leaning forward at their MacBooks at home. PCs, if PCs looking to promote me, whoever wants to sponsor me, that's who is obviously they're listening to that. But it wasn't your boyfriend at the time. It was, if I read the book correctly, it was an ex-boyfriend at the time. I think y'all had dated before, but you knew that you... like you said, the rom-coms, the streets might think that I am not a rom-com fanatic, but I'm not rom-com fanatic, but I grew up on R&B songs.
You understand the vibe, yeah.
Jodeci, the greatest diary of a madman ever made. And, so I still long for the love as it was on the tracks back then for the tapes and everything like that. But this wasn't a boyfriend too. So I guess what I would say is,
it was really risky.
Any advice for a woman who's thinking about asking?
I don't, because I think, the most important thing is to know that that's what you want and you're ready for. I don't know how it's going to work out for you, obviously, it takes 2 people. But I do think women can ask, and I think that that's out there. And, I think a lot of women are asking. Maybe this is the first step, and then the man is following through with the formal ask, so I don't think it's that crazy. And I think, we're a woman, that used to be kickstart her adult life, right? Getting married. But for many, many, many women, it doesn't anymore. They're fully adults by the time they decide on who their romantic partner is going to be. So, it's different. So we're all making decisions every step of the way in our adulthood here. And if that's the decision you're ready to make, go for it.
And that I'll go into the title of the book. The book is "But You're Still." I'm reading from my actual copy that I got right here, and I had to go old school. I had to dog ear and highlight. But you're still so young. How 30-somethings are redefining adulthood. So
Yeah,
I
and
guess
Marcus starts the book. I mean, your story is the one we lead off with.
It was a little weird, which is also weird because I write about myself all the time, but it was weird reading about being written about myself. It's like, and Marcus said, I'm like, did I say that? And I mean, to that point, another thing I thought was fascinating, a little bit emotionally strange journey to go through, and kind of reading the journey. And I'm glad there were 7 other stories to give some bookmarks and some milestones. Was the story that you tell in the book, and I remembered the event when I read about it, was when I was with my parents. I remember that exact day. I remember the rain. I remember drinking a margarita to get over it. So it was for the people at home. It was just one of those days. It wasn't even a particularly good or bad day. Well, obviously it wasn't a good day. It was just one of those days. I was supposed to go out to dinner with my parents, and I just could not handle it at the time. And how easy, and so it transposed me back to that place. But I had forgotten about that event taking place. But I remember on that day, it is with many tragic days, like it was the most important and tragic event that it ever had. No one could ever relate to this experience, and it would be something I would never recover from. So it was interesting being back in that place. And I actually wanted to open with, thank you for including me in this book. It's another reason I relaunched and rebranded the Marcus Garrett, is kind of, this will be, I could literally give this book to my son or daughter. This will be like a part of my library of legacy. So thank you for including me in the book. And it was super cool reading about that. And that's going to be my question, is why this book? I guess it's 2-part if you want to answer both. Why this book, and why these people in this book?
The book is about being in your 30s and reimagining what that decade and your entire adulthood can look like. And, I saw that happening, and the stats bear that out. We're getting married later. We have jobs, less security in our jobs. The birth rate is plummeting. We're not buying homes at the same rate. So the stats bore that out. But emotionally, stats don't offer me a lot of comfort like that. I don't think that's different for you, Marcus, because you're a numbers guy. Yep. But I really wanted to hear the real stories of what was happening and feel like less alone, is because, we still have this adulthood stereotype that we look to and think like, oh, am I doing this right? I'm not doing all of those things in that order. Am I behind? Am I okay? And so I set out to talk to people and hear the real stories of how they were moving through their 30s. And it was very important to me to talk to men and women, different races. Everyone's middle class, but that means a lot of different things now, because the middle class is so huge, as I'm sure you talk about all the time. So it was definitely different incomes and different debt levels, different geographical locations. And I also wanted to frame the book around the 5 traditional milestones of adulthood. So I wanted to find people who were struggling, with one of these milestones. And I'll just say what they are. And you can, everybody listening, it's natural. You want to know, have I checked them off? And one thing I talked about with Marcus a lot was this idea of the checklist. But adulthood traditionally is defined as finishing school, completing school, leaving home, getting married, becoming financially independent, and having children. And so I list that off, and I'm sure you guys are checking off, but also thinking like, really? I don't know. Am I going to be able to do all those things? Have I done those things? Do I want to do those things? So it's really different how we're looking at adulthood. And so that's why I wanted to write the book. And then as to why I wanted to hear Marcus' story, the first time I talked to you, you just jumped right in and just were very open about your story, but also mostly on the financial and career aspect. But I also, kept asking you, like, you have a girlfriend, what's going on in that way? Do you want kids? And that was a little harder to pull out of you, but you did want to talk about it, and you were figuring it out. And I very much wanted to look for people who were still trying to figure it out, who weren't, set and determined, or just knew the answer already. I wanted to talk to people who were still struggling to figure out, well, what is my adulthood going to look like? What's important to me? What's not? What do I want to go after? What am I going to leave behind? And you were right there, and a perfect person to talk to, and so generous with your time and with your honesty, and just like talking to a complete stranger who, like, you didn't know what I was gonna write, that's a lot of trust.
Yeah, I mean, to that latter point, well, I'll detract a little bit, so let me jot that one down because I'm good for forgetting stuff. Why me? I'm going to go back to that. But so people who didn't have their OneNote ready, I'm going to hit that one more time. The 5, and it was fascinating to me because these were defined in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And the book also talks about why the 1950s permeate our society so much. It is because people who lived in the 1950s are still alive. So the boomers out there, I think that's boomers. I might have just offended the boomer audience. I'm not really sure. So I'm a Mad Men fan, literally the show. And so that is my perspective of like the 1950s and 70s. I actually think that was representing. So I don't know how accurate that was, because you also talk about how the 50s are been glamorized over the years. But that checklist was completing school, leaving home. So I'll go a little bit slower so you can see how you are in your adulthood. Have you completed school? Have you left home? Are you financially independent? Which obviously I'm going to focus on this show because it's a personal finance show. Have you gotten married, and have you had children? So those are the 5 pillars of adulthood, according to our 1950s. And you also, brethren and sister, and you also talked about middle class, and just to give folks some range to that, which I do find fascinating. It's the middle class from the book was 40,000 to 250,000. I'm not adjusting for inflation, or I think that was 2019. I'm not doing any of that. That's just the range. And the part that I find fascinating about that is everyone wants to be middle class. And what I say by that is people who are not middle class, I'm not going to say poor, they want to strive and get into the middle class. So I guess in this case, they want to hit the 40,000. And then on the other side of it, people who are wealthy don't even want to be considered wealthy. They're doing interviews now about what is wealth. I saw some headline from Bloomberg, like Biden wants to tax wealth at 400,000, some billionaires like 400,000 a year. That's nothing. That's scraping by. So nobody wants to be rich and nobody wants to be poor. So everyone's trying to like get into the middle class, then firmly entrench themselves in the struggle of the middle class. So I thought that was fascinating.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
They really do.
And then to answer or speak to like why me and why I opened up to a stranger, I had 2 motivations, to be perfectly honest with you. Number one is I've been talking to strangers since, like, you could say AOL days. So that's terrifying. Terrifying because who was I talking to? AOL is a little bit sketch, we have now learned in our later years. And then I was fascinated what it would be like to objectively share my story and hear somebody interpret it. So I hadn't at that time gone to therapy. Actually, you encouraged me to go to therapy. You also encouraged me to read. Maybe
don't say it like that. Don't say it like,
actually, after interviewing you a few times, I'm gravely concerned.
You wanted to do it, and I said maybe your girlfriend's right. Maybe
you were one of many people who thought that would be a good idea for me, and it was. I am now a therapy advocate, and I try to be transparent about the therapy side of things. So yeah, I was selfishly motivated to hear what it would be like if I told my story and hear someone share it, because you might be like, man, this guy needs help. There was one part in the book, one of the people you were interviewing, and I like your little anecdotes about your interviews as well. And you were like, they pause so long between responding, you're not sure if you're going to respond at all. And I just think, like little anecdotes like that are cool, because I'll end with this and then kind of turn it over to you. Another meme that I read recently is you spend your 20s worried about what everyone thinks. By your 40s, you stop caring what people think. And then by your 60s, you realize no one was ever thinking about you in the first place. So I'm not at that 40 point.
True, right?
Yeah. I'm at that 40 point where I care a little bit less what people think, but I'm still interested because I'm 39. So I'm still interested. I'm like, what does Kayleen think about me? And then because representation matters, I might miss some, but here's what I jotted down. There's a Muslim couple, including a woman who converted to Muslim. I think she was Catholic. There's a gay couple, interracial, single mothers, and then something I really want to delve into as we go through this interview, single mothers who I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this great. Not only chose to be single mothers, but they literally went through fertility treatments looking to be single mothers, and they had a whole group and network around that. I really want to talk a lot about that because I know my audience will be interested around that. And I think you also froze your eggs, if I remember correctly. You shared the book. And then there's a stay-at-home dad. And then, as you said, all middle class. So great breadth of representation. Any of the people that you interviewed or any more nuance you want to add there?
Gosh, I think, thank you for pointing that out and spotlighting that, because I tried really hard, as a white woman, like, I get to tell my story, and, I've only gotten, white women have only gotten more vocal, and, women obviously need representation, but, I have a platform and I'm a writer, and, my story's in there, but I definitely didn't want it to be the only story. And in fact, like, my editor is also a white woman, and she kept being like, put more of yourself in the book. And I had to be like, really, like, do you just want this because, you're similar to me and you want to hear my story? Like, I think that's what's happening here. And that's not what I want to do. I want a lot of stories to shine and everyone to have a very full story. So I really tried hard to do that. And, and also, like, you couldn't include everyone. Like, there's no Asian American representation, which is just like, I bet, at a point you get overwhelmed with all the stories. But that was important to me. I feel like I skipped your question though. What is that?
No, you hit it, and that's a good point. Excuse me. That's a good point, and it speaks to I didn't notice that absence because of the breadth of coverage. But I know someone with that background. When your story is absent from the story, it quickly jumps out to you. And I know that because I post memes and things all the time on Instagram. Try to get better about representation myself, but there's always that comment. Like, if I post about middle class, it's like, what about the poor? If I post about the poor, it's like, what about the rich? So I post about I remember a post. So I have my viral post, my barometer is like over 300 likes. That's a whole nother spill. But this one had a few thousand likes, and I got it from the federal table. It had the median wealth for Black, white, Hispanic, other. And there were so many comments about other, and I was like, guys, like, I don't know, like, and I don't want to assume other is Asian because this is federal data, and I try to be true to the data. But it was fascinating to me that, number one, I was like, this is a sound point, so I now try to pull different data if I can't find that, and then which you don't get credit for, by the way. They don't go, oh, thanks for including everybody. They just move on. Those posts actually don't get as much likes anyway. That being said, and it was telling to me that, like, when your story's not there, it is glaringly obvious. So I felt like you did a good job, but I also appreciate or recognize that that I think it's good that you also say, okay, here's other stories that weren't also included. I mean, like you said, you can't include every story. I mean, I don't know another way to speak to that. But until you said it right now, I did not notice that.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I'm going to hit having children. So let me tell people right now, you're going to have to read the book, which I thought was a great read because of both the bookends that you have. And people are going to read the book, and it opens with me and it ends with me. They're like, of course, you love the book.
It does, though. You're not wrong.
What I mean by that, let me be very clear. What I mean by that is, I thought, just from as a storyteller perspective, I try to do the callbacks and everything as well. You open up very cleanly with, but you're still so young. And literally the last sentence in the book is, but you're still so young, as you reflect to the conclusions that you've come to. And I want to talk a little bit about that. But I'm not going to hit all of these. So I'll tell the people, actually, I'm not going to tell them what I'm hit because I don't want to drop from the show because they're like, oh, he's not going to hit my side of the story. You just have to keep on listening. I'm going to try something new here because it'll be easier for me. I'm going to pay some bills around here. And then the next section that we're going to hit is having children. So give me 2 seconds here.
Okay.
Did you know 1 in 3 Americans have $0 saved for retirement? Former guest Jerry Schneider wants to do something about this. In just 8 steps in less than 15 minutes, Jeremy's How to Build Wealth with Index Funds course taught me how to start investing Choose the right investment and open a new index fund with Vanguard. Do you want to break away from the 1 in 3 Americans with zero saved? Does that describe you? Learn more at themarcusgarrett.com/invest with/personal finance club, or scroll down to your video or podcast description right now. And back to the show.